Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mukadeen Poole. I'm a student assistant at the Intercultural International Student Services. This week's sponsors are CSB Campus Ministry, CSB Sustainability Office, CSB SU Libraries, Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement, Fine Arts Programming, Intercultural International Student Services, Joint Events Council, Koch Chair in Catholic Thought and Culture, Mathematics Department, PRISM, Reflect and Dialogue, St. John's University School of Theology, and SJU Theology on Tap. I encourage you to attend all the week sessions and events, RAD, Drowning Voices, Can You Hear Me, and Saturday Church. Today, we'll be enjoying Professor Bacon speaking on silent no more responding to microaggressions. In this session, she will be discussing microaggressions and then how bystanders practice intervening when a speaker says a microaggression to a member of a marginalized group. We will talk about ways for students, staff, and faculty to become advocates and allies. After the program, I encourage you all to complete evaluations that will be going out next week by email. Cool. Good morning.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to be here. If I had more time, I would take more time. So we're going to be moving quickly, and at a certain point, you are going to be working in groups of 4, and I really need you to be in groups of 4 and to not exclude anyone, because that would really go against our whole premise today of making everyone feel included. So I will try to encourage you to get into groups of 4 at that point, and we'll do it quickly. Okay. So, in 2007, Joe Biden was asked why people were so excited about Barack Obama's candidacy, and he responded, I mean, you've got the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. All right, turn to the people near you, and if you're not near anyone, maybe you could scooch closer, because it's nice to talk to people and not just sit there silently. So, what message do you think Joe Biden was trying to send so turn to someone nearby. What do you think he was trying to say? And then what message do you think he was unintentionally sending? All right, so what do you think? What was he trying to say? Was he trying to be rude? No? What was he trying to say? Someone go.
I think he was trying to say he's going to be a good candidate.
Yeah, right. Anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think he just meant to highlight all the good things about him and how he's just an all-around stand-up good guy.
Okay, yeah, so it's this really positive thing, right? He said all really positive things. But unfortunately, what are the messages that he also was sending with his attempt to be positive?
We talked about that he obviously had good intentions, that he is trying to highlight that he's going to be a good candidate, but the way he describes Barack is he's kind of describing him like he's not a stereotypical black person, so that's why he's going to be a good candidate.
Good.
He just doesn't realize that he has the microaggressions.
Good. So what were some of the what are some of his stereotypes about black men?
That they're not bright and clean and smart.
They're not bright and clean and smart. Anything to add?
Oh, I was going to say that too.
Same thing? Okay, yeah. So here he is trying to be really positive, and yet he's sending this message that's telling you what he thinks of African American men in general. And so that is, I think, a good example of a microaggression. So a microaggression is, oftentimes a verbal comment, but as we'll see, it doesn't have to be verbal. And it is a snub or an insult. It may be intentional, it may not be intentional. And the whole issue with a microaggression is that it's sending this message that is hostile or derogatory or negative towards this target group member. And it's solely based on the fact that this individual is part of a marginalized group. And so one key piece with microaggressions is that they often aren't intentional. In some ways, some of our prejudiced attitudes are just kind of slipping out, and we may not even be aware that we've just said something really offensive. But for the recipient of that microaggression, intention isn't really the issue. So it doesn't make someone feel better. So when I had a student tell me that he was really proud of himself, we were talking about stereotyping, and he told me, you know, when I first met you, I thought you were stupid and ditzy, but now I actually respect you. Like, he thought that was a really, like, he was so proud of himself. And yet, you know, he was telling me what he thought of female professors who smile. And so those microaggressions could come out really offensive, even if that's not the intention. Okay, so here are some examples of microaggressions. I want you to very quickly turn to the people near you and just talk about a few. What is the underlying message that is being sent? And a lot of these microaggressions are things that students on our campuses have heard. We also need to keep in mind that this is not just something that happens elsewhere, but this is happening on our campuses every day, unfortunately. Okay, turn to the people near you, just talk for a minute. What are some of the messages?
All
right. Do we have a volunteer to tell us what you first talked about? One of the offensive statements here. Yes.
So me and partner we talked about the Latinx student one. We were saying how that by having a professor or like a faculty member call out a student by just saying that since you're Latina, could you explain to the class what they think? By doing that, you're kind of verifying that, yeah, you're different. So like, even although you don't mean to do that, you're kind of verifying that you're different. And that kind of makes the student feel a certain type of way, although the professor or faculty probably didn't mean to. And also by just doing that, it kind of like, I guess it's kind of like where we don't know where the student may grew up from. Like, what if they're a Latinx student, but they were adopted, they grew up in a traditional Caucasian household, and it's just the differentiation between them. So.
Good, so that person could really feel put on the spot, even though, again, the professor's probably thinking, look at me, I'm being inclusive, I'm making sure that, you know, the marginalized students in class really feel like we notice them. What else happens when we call in someone to represent their group?
It's assuming that everyone in that group has the same culture. It's not true.
Yeah, the same culture and the same, you know, that we could just pluck this one person. They're not really an individual. They're just the representative of this whole group of people. Whereas the white students in the class get to be Pam and whoever they, you know, themselves as individuals. So that is a really problematic one. How many of you have witnessed something like that in class? So look around. That is happening in our classes. And I'm hoping you're seeing why that shouldn't be happening. Okay, so I want to make sure we have enough time, so we're going to forge ahead. I did just want to point out that microaggressions do not have to be verbal. And so these are all behavioral microaggressions that I have frequently heard students of color talk about. And so here we have students saying, you know, when I'm on the link and there are no more seats, I see the white student walk up and then look around like, oh no, what am I going to do? And they maybe they just decide they're going to stand. Or, you know, you come into class on the first day and there's just a whole row of empty chairs around you because no one will come and sit by you. Also, students of color often report that, like, when they're the only student of color and they walk in the classroom, people might stop and stare at them, not in a like, hey, nice to meet you way, but like, what is he doing here sort of way. And finally, lots of reports of when there's a single student of color working in a group with white students. Oftentimes that student, you know, if you, as the professor, I can sometimes see the white students are all turned towards each other. The poor student of color is like off, not even really part of the group. Like, technically they're part of the group, but they're not being included or they're not being given important tasks. So all of those things are sending messages. turn to your group. What messages are being sent from these behavioral microaggressions? What do you think? What sort of message, if you were that student of color and this behavior was happening to you, what sort of message?
The thing Kramer brought up, and I just thought about it, it's almost as if like you don't even exist. And I remember like had that feeling like we did.
Yeah, you're not there. You're kind of just ignoring. So yeah, that feeling, and we know, I'm a social psychologist, we know that being socially excluded and feeling like you don't exist is one of the most painful things that can happen to someone in a group. So that is really upsetting to individuals. What else?
An us versus them kind of dichotomy.
Good. What else?
The body language is like in the nonverbals is essentially just being condescending to a different group.
Yeah, so when you say condescending, it's like, I don't want to be
Yeah.
you, right? So
Yeah.
it's,
Like
yeah.
you're not good enough for me to, sit next to you on the bus,
Good.
For the third one, it's kind of sending the message that people of color aren't capable of handling tasks that require a lot of responsibility.
Right, yes, so it's sending all sorts of messages about, people's competence, how welcome they are, if they really belong here, and, do other people feel comfortable around them? Do they even exist? And so there are lots of ways in which we can be sending messages to marginalized group members, and sometimes we're not even saying them, we're just doing it by our actions or inactions. All right, so the most common response when people overhear a microaggression, so the microaggression is not directed towards them as the target, but they're just overhearing it happening, is no response at all. So that is most of the time in a class discussion when a microaggression is stated, everyone just keeps going. You're in the dorm, whatever, we just keep going and nobody responds to it. So turn back to your group. What message is sent when you overhear something offensive and you and everyone else just keep going and there's no acknowledgement? What sort of messages are being sent? Yes.
That it's okay.
Yeah,
to be
right.
said.
It's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So how might it be interpreted then also?
That they don't really care at all.
Yeah, right. They don't. So either it's not a big deal, or I don't really care that someone's feelings are probably just really hurt, or they're really upset.
It's not my business.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't for me, so who am I to step in? Sure.
Maybe they've done it before, and that's why they're like, no one ever tell me something, so why respond?
Yeah, right. So you kind of get to this point where what's the point of even saying something? Because nothing's going to change.
They're just being naive, people don't even notice it when it's happening.
Yeah, right. So sometimes the target of the microaggression is doing a lot of work, feeling sorry for the person who just said the offensive thing, oh, that poor person is just so ignorant, they just don't understand. And so there's that sort of dynamic as well. The target is often thinking, am I overreacting? What if I say something and everyone else says, whoa, what's wrong with you? So the target is often, really surprised, hurt, upset, and worried about making a response. And then meanwhile, the person who isn't personally affected is often well, it's not really my problem. I didn't say it, so I'm not racist. Why do you think people don't respond in addition to just it's not my problem?
They don't want the situation to escalate.
Right, we do not like conflict, right? So if we can just pretend that didn't happen, that works pretty well.
A good point brought up is that sometimes people are more worried about the punitive aggressor than the
Right, I wouldn't want to embarrass the person by saying something, because then they would realize they said something wrong.
maybe they don't know how to respond.
Right, sometimes you might be thinking oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? So there are a variety of things that can keep people from responding. And one of them is that people often just don't know what to do. And so today we're going to practice. So when you, next to your microaggression, which unfortunately probably won't take that long, you will be better able to not just say to yourself, well, I don't know what to do, or it won't matter, because research suggests that for that target who has just received a microaggression and seen that nobody responded, it's really upsetting. And it is sending the message that nobody else cares about me. All of these people feel this way. Maybe they all agree with this person. So not saying something is probably the most harmful thing you can do as the bystander. So even if you don't get it totally right, you're better off saying something than just letting it go. And so we're going to practice. So what I'm going to do is I have some instructions I'm going to hand out. You're going to be in groups of 4, and you're going to take turns with the different roles. And so I have a little handout with some vignettes. And each time we have a situation where the speaker is going to say a microaggression. And so I don't want you just going, oh no, I could never say that. Well, we've all said microaggressions, unfortunately. So I don't want us again get hung up on like, oh, I can't even say anything like this. Yes, you can. And it's for a good cause, because then we're going to practice responding to that. So we have the speaker who's going to say the offensive remark. We have the target. In this version of the workshop, I want the target to not be the one that has to defend himself or herself. So we are thinking about situations where there's a target who's just something really offensive that's been said about the target or to the target, and we want the responder, the bystander, to be the one to say something. So the target's mostly going to just sit there and feel uncomfortable. The responder is the one who has to try to challenge what has just been said, and keeping in mind that we don't like conflict. So just calling someone a name is not, I mean, that's a response, but it's not going to be a response that probably makes the situation better. So you want to think about how can you come up with a response that might get the speaker to start thinking like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I guess that was offensive. And, you know, again, a lot of times the speaker might start saying like, well, I didn't mean that, or it was a joke, or whatever. Then we'll just move on at that point. But this is just good to keep in mind that when we make microaggressions and we're called out on them, don't respond by saying why it was okay that you did it or they didn't understand. You need to accept it and apologize and learn from that. Because, again, spending all your time getting defensive or angry at the person who you just harmed makes no sense. Okay, and then finally, we have the coach. The coach is just going to get to watch the little scenario unfold, and then the coach can give feedback saying like, yeah, that seemed pretty effective, or like, oh, it seemed like you made the person mad, or you kind of missed the point. And then you'll switch, and you pick a new scenario, and you'll do it again. So those are the 4 roles, and instead of just like starting with the offensive comment, have like a little, just, you know, like, there's one where you're talking about a movie, so you can talk about a movie for a little bit, and then you slip in the microaggression. There's one where you're studying in the library, so you can talk about what you're doing for class, and then slip it in, so that it's more of a little skit rather than just like everyone's just reading a line and moving on. Are there questions before we start? Okay, so I'm going to have you get into groups of 4. I'm going to come around and hand out things, but if you're not in a group of 4, you don't get stuff. So you may need to move to create a group of 4. Yeah. So what were your reactions to participating in this?
A little awkward.
A little awkward, yes.
But it actually was very good. Yeah, I had a very good group and we had some good conversations.
I think it was hard to be the responder and figure out what to say. That's the right words to use.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it was really hard being a responder also because like when you respond to someone, you kind of have to have to be careful what you're saying, because I realized that with my group, when we respond to something, we kind of ask questions to the person that's saying it. It's kind of like ask like where is that coming from, like do you understand? Because sometimes when you ask the question, they kind of realize that, oh dang, like that's not right what I just said. But sometimes like when you ask the question, sometimes it could be kind of like I guess how should I word it, like kind of like biased or like in a different way. So or like it's also and like when you're responding, it's also the tone you're responding in also, because you don't want to escalate the problem in the situation. And like what I was just talking to Michelle about, like when you respond to something, it's kind of like sometimes people feel uncomfortable because they don't know like what if it's within that group of friends. But I was saying like but there's a certain time and place for it if your group of friends decide to do it. But even though you know it's wrong, you should always be aware it's wrong when you know. So, yeah.
That's a good point. Did others find that asking questions was a good strategy? I know Dr. Janser often talks about what are the questions that you ask when you...
I asked them and started hard of hearing, and I said, what did you say? I said, what? Where? Who? Was I there? What?
Yeah, so, oh, yes.
WDYNBT. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Like, just sometimes the facial expression goes all the way to like, what? Like, this moving your face, like, seeing that person doesn't approve of what you said, frowning, and looking them directly in the eye goes the wrong way also.
Right, good. So, yes, so those sorts of questions, and sometimes when you ask that, of course, we all are aware that we're saying offensive things, but sometimes asking the question is then the moment where people are like, oh, wait, oh, gosh, that was terrible. I can't believe I just said that. And again, then you want to like make sure you don't do it again and not just say, well, I didn't really mean that. Or again, it shouldn't be all about you and how bad you feel. So what were some other strategies that worked? Asking questions.
Pulling them aside.
Pulling them aside, and what would you say then?
Well, I mean, the pulling them aside was so that, in a private setting, we were talking about how it's sometimes better because then they can't just laugh it off with friends or whatever. But I would tell them that it's not okay, the comment wasn't okay in a non-defensive or non-angry tone, and then explain why.
Good. So that idea that maybe, there sometimes are going to be better or worse scenarios to, call someone out in public. Sometimes that's what you need to do, right? Because it's just so offensive that your goal is to really make sure that the target realizes, like, this is not okay and I'm with you. But sometimes if the goal really is to get people to change their minds, maybe you say something minor at first, but then you pull them aside later and talk about that more in more detail. Are there any of the scenarios where pulling someone aside later seemed particularly beneficial?
Oh, yeah, that's what you were saying, like, not, like, it wasn't going to work, so I was like, you're leaving it for something else. Like that.
Say that a little louder.
Oh, it's just like, I thought you were going to say, instead of beneficial, I thought you were going to go towards, like, where it's not helpful in that situation. I thought you were going to say that instead, and then kind of...
Oh, okay. Well, do you want to say something about that?
I think
No? Okay. Okay, so if we think about the scenarios, were there any scenarios where maybe talking to someone later about what happened might be a more effective?
I'm a little iffy between this scenario, and I don't know if it would be the right choice, but I think scenario 5 with the professor and the Native American student, it's kind of hard because I don't want to discredit the professor, but then I don't think that what the professor is doing is okay, but then just kind of like standing up in the middle of like their class and being like, hey, that's not okay. It's kind of like, it's like I get that the intention is good, but then it's kind of like you're just outright trying to embarrass the professor in a way. So I was like, I probably would have waited until after class and be like, hey, like I appreciate what you were trying to do, but I don't think that it was okay how you called out a Native American to speak on that matter.
Yeah. Do others have thoughts about how you would handle the professor?
I personally, and I experienced this like in real life, like I prefer to do it pull up to the side, so that way it's kind of like it's not like in front of everybody. You get all over the place, because then you're able to talk to them face to face, and like they understand where you're coming from, and give your articulate and like how your actions can impact on them.
Good. So when you do it kind of in the public setting, like if someone called me out right now, I would probably feel really embarrassed and I would get really defensive. And so whatever you said to me, I'm probably not going to hear it, and I'm going to just tell you why I was right and why it was good that I did that, and just dig a bigger hole, right, in that case. And so it's not the case that, that person doesn't they should be embarrassed, but if the hope there with someone who's have a higher status than you is to get them to change, probably pulling them aside is a better way for them to actually hear what you have to say, and not just react with that defensiveness where they're just not even going to hear, and maybe they'll double down on what they've been doing. Yes?
I have a question. Since there are professors in the room, what do professors recommend when speaking to professors about how they might offend students?
Do that again.
What do professors recommend? Should we say in class, or should we talk to the professor after class?
I think it depends on the professor and the student and the relationship. Just with this last thing about pulling the professor aside, I kind of disagree in that here is a person that has just been excluded, not only from a social group, but from someone in authority. And if anything, that person needs an ally. So if there were any scenario in which I would stand up, it would be that one. But at the same time, I understand that if the goal is to teach the professor, to teach the speaker, you would also maybe want to pull them aside. But I think that talking to professors, I think some would be amazingly open and just, I had no idea, I'm embarrassed, and then some would get defensive and maybe even punish students. Realistically, I mean, I'm trying to be honest, yeah.
You also have to keep the target in mind, because I think if I was the one being targeted, and even if the statement made me feel really bad about myself, I don't know if I would want someone standing up and then making a thing about it. I guess it would depend on the kind of person the target is, but
That's a good point. Yes, in the back.
So how about, would a better strategy so that the target knows they have an ally too be to pull aside the person, but also then to approach the target in a private setting and say, hey, I'm with you, I spoke to this person, and I want to let you know that what was said wasn't okay.
Good thoughts.
I would say as a faculty member, we need to do better. And faculty need to work with one another to do better. That it is on us. It shouldn't be on students to be teaching faculty. We need to do our own work. And so the faculty member, when I say something stupid in class, when I do this in class, there's no wrong way for a student to approach me. But I need to step up. And so do all of my faculty help.
yeah, I would say either in person or in class, and it's happened both. And when it's happened outside of class, then I bring it back to class and explain what was brought to me, so that the class knows that I've been, this has been brought to my attention, I see it, this was a mistake. Here's how, it could have been said differently in the future.
Yep, and those are good points. I will just say that I often hear from students that is one where they get really afraid of what's going to happen to them, what the professor is going to do to them. And so, yes, I agree that saying something might be great, but as a social psychologist, I also really understand how power impacts how we respond. And so, in my mind, doing it outside of class when you feel safer is probably going to increase the chances that you actually do it. So,
I just have a question. I'm struggling to understand why it's best to classify the person that's processing the comment as a target, because to me it seems that in order to be a target, that person would be willingly specified against, and if it's sort of an offhanded thing, as in these examples, it doesn't seem to be targeting that person directly, so I don't know what you describe them as in replacement of that, but there certainly seems to be an element of intentionality that isn't included in this, and I feel like it should be. Do you understand what I'm saying about that?
yeah, I guess part of a target is, again, social psychologists will need that. that's a term that we would use to be the recipient of the microaggression. I guess I would disagree that people aren't. So if you're part of that marginalized group and someone says a microaggression towards your marginalized group, you are going to feel like it was said to you and that you were the target. And so I purposely have the one where we have someone where people are saying offensive things about LGBTQ plus people and they don't even realize that the target is there. And that was something from the focus groups last semester that people talked about having to endure, having people make these comments, assuming no one here is LGBTQ plus, so I can say this, there's no target. So I guess that would be my response. What are some other, so asking questions, what were some other strategies that you came up with?
I would, this is giving me a chance to think about being more proactive. So like with the one with the American Indian student, I thought maybe if you were thinking about these things in advance, like how would you respond to somebody who is insulting, maybe someone who's gay or lesbian, but by having something in your head, by saying, you know, really I have lots of friends and I think they're lovely, or you know, or the surprisingly articulate, saying something like, you know, I've known John and he's a fabulous speaker. I'm not surprised at all. By complimenting instead of, is that a positive way to respond?
What do we think? Because wouldn't Barack Obama say, I am awesome, I am good looking and, you know, articulate and whatever, but that's not really the point, right? Because it's the compliment is suggesting, this is so surprising that this black man is articulate.
Oh no, I was surprising that you would think it's surprising.
Right, but by saying, because of course we know John is, you're not really getting at the underlying assumption that, so John is somehow different from everyone else. So yeah, that's my reaction to that. Did anyone try the strategy of like, don't say that? That's wrong, that's bad. Good, because it doesn't work very well, does it? I mean, because then the person really might not have any understanding about why what they said is a problem. And sometimes then they'll start disagreeing with you. No, it wasn't. And then you're in this kind of weird loop. So instead, sometimes talking about how it makes you feel. I feel really uncomfortable when you say things like that. It's hard for them to say, no, you don't feel uncomfortable. Well, no, you can't tell me I don't feel uncomfortable. And then you could explain. Because it kind of sounds like you're suggesting that black people aren't articulate, and I'm not okay with that. So that's a way to kind of get it in there without just saying, don't say that again. So they're like, there's something about articulate, I'm just not supposed to talk about it, and they may not understand. Are there other questions that you have or thoughts that you have in our last few minutes here?
Yes. Going back to the professor one, what are the next steps if you do address it and the person doesn't change?
That is an excellent question. And maybe, Brandon, do you want to jump in? Do you have any suggestions as the IISS director and the human rights officer?
Yeah. So we do have a human rights policy. And you should definitely consider that as an option. However, I would encourage you to speak with me or another trusted employee with whom you can process to figure out how you're thinking about it, what you would actually like to see happen. The reality of it is, in situations like that, I don't know if a process, if you will, can give you the healing and the reconciliation that you need. So that's why I'm advising that maybe there's some other options to also consider, not just those others, but also. Because again, what we're wanting to do is try and recognize the hurt and heal the harm.
Thank you. And I will just put in a plug, I'm a department chair, and so another resource that students don't seem to appreciate enough is that if you are working with a faculty member and you try talking to the person and it's not working, you can always come to the chair of the department, and the chair will listen to you, you can speak confidentially, and the chair will need to address this in some way. And the chair, again, social psychologist, the chair has more authority and can start to speak to a peer about behaviors that need to change. So you as a student do have resources out there to help you as you go along. All right, go sit by someone that you haven't sat by before and have a good